cleared all of this all the way up to Stafford Field, which we're going to see in about 3 miles. And all of this was citrus groves. It was grapefruit trees and orange trees and mandarin trees. There's a few remnants along the way, but here, the tabby wall that you see around it is from his era, so 1830s or so. And most of you being from Florida in this area probably realize that tabby is a mix of sand and shells of lime. You know, how it's made as like a cement. So that wall's been there for nearly 200 years at this point.
The history of the little church is the fact that after the Civil War was over and the men and women tore their homes down on the Stafford plantation, they did bring the lumber down here and they built the first African Baptist church. For Fran's group, y'all will see the first church when you go in Beulah's house. It burned down in the early 1900s. They came along and they rebuilt this church right here. There's no electricity in this church. The windows don't go up. The panes are painted to look like stained glass. And your pews are different because the families that came to church here built and brought in their own pews. First African Baptist Church. I'm born and raised a Baptist. This is a good sign of an old hard shell Baptist church where families would build their own pews and bring them in. Because let me tell y'all something about a Baptist. When we go in that church and I sit on that pew, that's my pew every Sunday. I want nobody on my pew. And if you get on my pew, I'm going to just stand there and look at you. And then sooner or later, you're going to get the hint that, hey, this must be her pew. Now, that's a good sign of a Baptist church. Now, let's fast forward to the Kennedy wedding, September the 21st of 1996. How many of y'all have ever been in Southeast Georgia in September? It's hot and it's humid. That should have been around the 6 o'clock wedding that day. Carol's home over here. And y'all, a lot of the information I'm going to give y'all came from the lady that lives over here that has her retained rights. Because when I first started doing these tours, she came over one day. She said, hey, I was at the wedding. Can I do the tour? Can I give this information? Absolutely, because I'm going to learn from you, Carol. You were at the wedding. I knew she was friends with one of the Ferguson family members, but the friendship had ended. She said, however, I was out here that day. She said, I saw a couple of pickup trucks coming up. Y'all, they travel in the back of open pickup trucks. She said, so when I saw them all coming out here dressed up, you ladies are welcome to come in. Okay, that's perfect with me. She said, I saw the pickup trucks coming up, saw everybody was dressed up. She said, so I thought, okay, we got something big about to happen. She said, I went over to my place, got myself a beer and a bag of popcorn. I was getting ready to watch the show. She said, and then he walked up to me. Now, he was an hour late for his wedding. She said, I saw the people sitting in there. Y'all, they didn't know where they were coming to. They were told 3 days ahead of time in New York by John what airport to be at, what day to be there, and what time to be there. From there, they were flown to Jacksonville, Florida, picked up by private citizens in St. Mary's. I talk fast. He's watching my lips look like, how are you doing that? When they were picked up in St. Mary's, Georgia, when you stay at Grayfield, you catch the ferry to Lucy R. Ferguson to go to Grayfield. That day, they couldn't take them to Fernandina. Does anybody in here know why they wouldn't take that group of people to Fernandina Beach, Florida? Fran, do you know why they wouldn't take them to Fernandina?
Privacy, probably.
Privacy. There's too many tourists in St. Mary's, Georgia. In Fernandina. Y'all, my little hometown, St. Mary's, Georgia, and for Fran's group, I was born and raised in St. Mary's, Georgia. My sidewalks still roll up at dark 30, except Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We got 2 restaurants that have live music down there. Other than that, we have no tourists down there. If they had taken that group of people to Fernandina, everybody would have known them. Everybody that had anything to do with that wedding signed NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. So Carol's out here. She says, I see all these people, and all of a sudden John Kennedy Jr. comes up to me. She said, I realized somebody had already said, hey, everything's an hour late, we're hot, the windows aren't going up. They all came outside, they were walking around out here. She took John to her place and they got 2 lanterns. They brought these lanterns back over here and hung one right here and hung one right here because there were only a few candles in here. Very minimally decorated. Y'all can see from Fran's picture, they didn't have a lot of decorations in here. He's an hour late because he couldn't find his daddy's cufflinks. Once they found his cufflinks, they got him on down here. Now we're waiting an hour on the bride to show up. They get her down here and somebody asked her, why were you late? She couldn't get her dress on. It had been made like a slip dress by the designers that she worked for in New York. And for you gentlemen, a slip dress for us ladies has no zippers and buttons. And we're either going to pull it on or we're going to slide it up. They had her hair and makeup all done, and when they were trying to get it on her, it wouldn't go on because she was swollen from the heat and the humidity. Well, then she got nervous and she started sweating. Well, trying to put on a dress like that and you're sweaty is like trying to put on a wet bathing suit, ladies. And how hard is that? Listen, I'd rather just not have on a bathing suit than put on a wet bathing suit. So they finally get that dress on her. They got the hair and makeup fixed again. And travel her down here. Now, how are these guests traveling from Grayfield to here? Grayfield travels you in the back of open pickup trucks. That's how all those guests travel. And again, those people didn't know where they were coming, so imagine those wealthy ladies from New York sitting here eating. So, listen, I'm going to shorten this just a little bit because I know we all need to head back to Plum Orchard. Everybody go out on YouTube. And y'all YouTube that wedding video. It's about an hour and a half long. The guy that narrated it is John Kennedy Jr.'s best friend. The recorder he's using was given to him as a wedding gift by John, and John asked him to bring it to record his wedding. The guy that sang came from Fernandina. He sang 2 songs that day. On that video, you will see him stand up and sing part of that one song that he sang that day, and that one song was Amazing Grace. Then he went on to sing another song, and that was Will the Circle Be Unbroken. September the 21st of 96, we got married. July the 17th of 99, the plane went down. And a lot of people always ask me, what did his mother think about being out here? Miss Jackie Kennedy Onassis passed away May of 94, so she wasn't here, but his sister, brother-in-law, and the children were here. And I shortened it just a little bit. I'll tell the rest of my story when I get in my van, and Fran will tell some more of the story when she gets in her van.
So right here, coming down the drive now, imagine this driveway is paved with crushed.
Now originally, I know, but you think of Gilded Age, Victorian era, the style was very dark. This room, the wallpaper is particularly dark because over time it has darkened. You think of the sun is fading out. As you can see an example here on the wall where we had something hanging, and then around the fireplace there, and well, these windows where the sun didn't reach it to the original dark color. And the wallpaper is burlap, which is really unusual. And it's got a stenciled stamp on it, hand-painted, and that is a griffin with a Florida blue that's Carnation family crest. Now, when George from what I understand, our curator does have the other shades, but she doesn't switch things out very often. Here we've got furniture that's from Max's time period, maybe it's from later. The auction records, Margaret came in 1903, and they're looking all the personal belongings. So we have $1,000 of books. 1,000 volumes of books taken out. So I'm so curious about what's in there. We were sold at auction for $1. So I'm always wondering what they need to take them out there first. But the books that you see in here now, we've got the blue set that was Dr. Johnson's ceremonies. The others are just from random time periods donated by the colleagues to kind of fill in the shelves. And here on the desk, we've got the book plates. Here on the right, and these bottles were found in their trash pile, their dump. And I don't know if it was common for craftsmen to like mark their work, but I thought it would be but the costumes that you see in December, they decorate the whole house for Christmas. And so they have one weekend in December, they have a big festival, not festival, event here where you've got, they're playing croquet on the lawn, the bears moving all the way to the front. hard to know when this was the style. But the Park Service has this room staged with a trunk from the earlier years, showing that guests didn't just come for the night, they would come for an extended stay for weeks or months even. It later became a kids' room. This is original. And today, these are apartments. In the 1980s, the Park Service turned these into rangers' apartments, and then now they're volunteer apartments. So if you ever want to come live in the mansion, you give 3 tours a day, you get off at 3 o'clock. It's a good gig. We're going back into the original house when we put up these stairs. 1898 portion of the house. The attic is pretty interesting. I wish I could show y'all that. There's several bedrooms. There's a rooftop deck that the servants could access. A common area up there. We're going to just continue down to the main staircase. So you're welcome to go down if you like, and just wait in front of the fireplace if you don't mind. I'll make sure we get everybody. So we have Margaret going down for dinner in our fancy gown. Right. You're going to pass by the center of the staircase there. You can see the scallop edge of possibly where a bear skin or something is hanging. And then the outer edge where there may have been a tapestry or a portrait. So this is the original kitchen. In 1898, the original kitchen. The stove is from the original construction as well. And this stove was fueled by coal instead of wood. So imagine all the activity taking place in here. They could have had all kinds of meals and that kind of thing. It would have been very hot and real hot. But the back area is where they would have had the flour, sugar, maybe cakes and pies. A good example of the kind of meals they have here is, think about, so there was an Easter luncheon, and Easter just happened. So the chef prepared a life-size hen molded out of ice cream with a sugar-spun nest and life-size eggs in a nest around it. And that just kind of gives you the idea of the elaborate, the Gilded Age meals that they had. George and Margaret threw that for them. Down there is
You should. Slow. They went to a different way.
Need some help?
No, I'm good, thank you. No, I wish I took my time. So you can see the bottom of the elevator here. I don't know if they ever intend to restore it, but you can see it once it was very, very nice. We had an engineer come from the houses in Newport, Rhode Island, and he explained to the park that this was a water-powered elevator. Nobody ever goes over the stairs. But you can. I think it's like a subconscious thing. People just stay.
I think we're waiting for you.
But you can actually come and walk around the room if you like. So this is a squash tennis court. And I always call it a squash court. I found out in the last year that it's squash tennis, which is a different game. I don't know about for sure. But I know that it was very similar to racquetball. And so if you were going to observe the game, you would want to sit up there in the gallery. The skylight has been restored. So when they put the new roof on, they restored the skylight. So imagine that you could play here, you know, day and night. They have electric lights as well. But as a volunteer, you can now people are often surprised at how deep this was. Probably not the people. Anybody want to guess how deep it might be? Some riders are young before. It is 10 feet deep. And part of the illusion is that the stairs are on like half stairs. So we want to kind of calculate this as really deep in it. But it's 10 feet to the top, about 9 feet or so to the rear. And this was built from sample oil, so it smells like elevators. Doesn't mean that it's an elevator. It's that like smell. Imagine this pool being full of. And then they're going to heat it, but they're going to smell this okay.
That's a big screen door.
It is. All the doors. Greg, maybe you could help me during your last days at my house when you built this.
I need a crane to put that up.
Sarah, you're permanent.